For decades, the Gilgo Beach serial slayings have haunted those living on Long Island, New York. Spanning between 1993 and 2011, the grisly killings of 11 women have left a deep wound in the local community, baffled investigators and intrigued true crime enthusiasts. The more time that passed, the less likely it seemed that it would ever be solved. But then, in 2023, the authorities announced that a suspect had emerged, and he had been charged with the murders of 7 of the victims. Rex Heuermann is, according to his family, a perfectly mundane man. A married father of 2, he'd lived on Long Island his entire life, making his living as an architect. Even to this day, his family questions whether or not the authorities have the right man in custody. They cannot fathom how the reserved and professional Heuermann could have been harbouring a dark double life for the last 3 decades. Join us for this documentary as we examine the case of Rex Heuermann, the suspected Gilgo Beach killer. The first known murder in the Gilgo Beach serial killings is that of Sandra Costilla, a 28-year-old living in New York City at the time of her disappearance. Sandra was last seen in November of 1993, with her time of death estimated to be around the 19th or the 20th of that month. Her body was found shortly after she vanished by hunters in a secluded and wooded area in North Sea, Long Island, about 60 miles from Gilgo Beach. 3 years later, in April of 1996, the legs of a younger woman were discovered by a passerby at Blue Point Beach on Fire Island, near Davis Park, off the coast of Long Island. The remains had been wrapped in plastic, and there were several important features on the legs as noted by investigators. A 3.5-inch scar on the lateral middle part of the lower right leg, a 1-inch linear scar on the lateral mid to lower right leg, a 1/2-inch scar on the medial side of the right ankle, a 2-inch surgical scar on the medial side of the left ankle, and suture scars next to it. No further remains would be found from this victim until April 12, 2011, just 8 days shy of exactly 15 years later, when her skull was discovered off Ocean Parkway, west of Tobay Beach in Nassau County, New York. There were no distinguishing details on the skull, with investigators marking the victim's age as anywhere between 18 and 50 years old, and no jewellery or clothing was found with the remains. For years, this victim was known only as Fire Island Jane Doe, or Jane Doe No. 7. She was not identified until August of 2023, when it was announced that she was 34-year-old Karen Vergata, who disappeared in 1996. When she went missing, she was a sex worker living in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan, New York, and her family last heard from her on Valentine's Day. She was never reported missing. Authorities have suggested that she was originally killed on Long Island, but that her legs were carried to Fire Island after they were disposed of in the water. The third victim of the Gilgo Beach killer was discovered on June 28, 1997, by a man who was walking through a wooded area of Hampstead Lake State Park in Lakeview, New York, with his daughter. Disturbingly, the body had been dismembered. To this day, the legs, arms, and head of the victim have never been found. She was placed inside a container by the brand Rubbermaid, and a red towel and a floral pillowcase were also held inside. Due to a tattoo the woman had on her body, the victim became known as Peaches Doe. In a bid to help identify her, investigators took a photograph of the inked design and had it published in a nationwide tattoo magazine, hoping that someone would recognize the artist's work. A short time later, a tattoo artist named Steve Cullen, who was based in Connecticut, reached out to the authorities, recognizing the design as one of his. He stated that the person he'd given it to was a young black woman, around 18 or 19 years old. She had been in the company of 2 other women, an aunt and a cousin. He stated that during the session, she had mentioned being from the Bronx or Long Island, and that she was in Connecticut because she was having issues with her boyfriend at the time. It was theorized that Peaches had further identifying tattoos on her legs and arms, which was why her killer dismembered her. For years, there was little more information to go on in this case, but in 2016 it was announced by authorities that further skeletal remains recovered from Jones Beach State Park in 2011 belonged to Peaches. Furthermore, they noted that the body of a toddler had also been discovered in 2011 along Ocean Parkway. DNA evidence proved that the toddler was Peach's child. Due to where these other remains were found, investigators added that Peaches and her young child were possibly the victims of the Gilgo Beach killer. Finally, in April of 2025, a breakthrough in the case came when Nassau County Police announced that Peach's real name was Tanya Denise Jackson. She was born on October the 22nd, 1970 in Alabama, and had served a short stint in the US military between 1993 and 1995. Her daughter was named Tatiana Mary Dykes. She was born on March 17, 1995, making her just 2 years old at the time of her demise. At the time of their deaths, Tanya and Tatiana were living in Brooklyn, New York City, and Tanya was possibly working in a doctor's office. The pair were never reported missing because Tanya was estranged from her family. Tatiana's father was identified by investigators and is currently cooperating with them. Authorities added that the pair's murders may be unrelated to the Gilgo Beach killings, and they have not fully ruled out this possibility. In 2000, just 3 years after Tanya Jackson's torso was discovered, another female torso was found wrapped in garbage bags in a wooded area of Manorville, New York, on November the 19th. This location is around 45 miles from Gilgo Beach. Like several of the victims in this case, the torso remained unidentified for decades, and this Jane Doe was dubbed the Manorville Jane Doe, or Jane Doe number 6. 11 years after her torso was recovered, her head, right foot, and her hands were located. But it would take another 9 years for investigators to identify her as 24-year-old Valerie Mack. At the time of her disappearance, Valerie was a sex worker and mother of 1 living in Philadelphia. Her family last saw her in the spring or summer of 2000 in Port Republic, New Jersey, but she was never reported missing. The 5th victim of the Gilgo Beach killer was discovered on July the 26th, 2003, when yet another torso of a young woman turned up, again in Manorville, New York. A dog walker stumbled across the remains on top of plastic sheeting on a pile of scrap wood at the end of a paved road. A tattoo on the woman's torso, depicting a single wing, had been mutilated, possibly by the killer, in an attempt to prevent identification of the body. Still, the tattoo was visible enough that authorities were able to photograph it and circulate the image, which led to them receiving a positive ID of the woman as 20-year-old Jessica Taylor, who was last seen at the Port Authority bus terminal between the 18th and the 22nd of July. DNA confirmed that the body was that of Jessica's. At the time of her disappearance, Jessica was a sex worker living in Manhattan. According to a report by the New York Times, the tattoo originally depicted a winged heart with Remy's Angel written inside. A police officer claimed that Remy was an acquaintance of Jessica's. The later reports alleged that this was a type of branding and that Remy was her pimp. 25-year-old Maureen Brainard Barnes was last seen on July the 9th, 2007. Like many of the victims, Maureen was a sex worker, and on the day of her disappearance, she told her friend that she was going to an out call, or to see a client, at a motel in Manhattan. However, Maureen never returned home afterwards, and her friend reported her missing around a week later when she still hadn't heard from her. According to Cosmopolitan, Maureen had been in and out of the sex industry for the last few years. She had a day job as a telemarketer but struggled to pay her bills, including her mortgage, which had prompted her recent return to sex work as she was unable to find other means of employment. She used Craigslist to advertise her services and had been threatened with eviction around the time of her disappearance. A short time after she went missing, Maureen's friend, Sarah Carnes, received a call from a blocked number. Upon answering it, she was met with the voice of a man she didn't recognize, who told her that he'd seen the young mother of two working at a whorehouse in Queens, but he refused to specify the location of the brothel and would not tell Sarah who he was. When she insisted he call back on an identifiable number so that the police could respond to his information, he said he would, promising to give her the address. But he never did. Maureen's remains were discovered 3 years later in December 2010. She had been restrained using 3 leather belts, one of which was used to tie her feet and ankles together. Meanwhile, Melissa Barthelemy, a 24-year-old originally from Erie County, New York, vanished on July 12, 2009. At the time of her disappearance, she was a sex worker living in the Bronx. Like Maureen, she used Craigslist to advertise her services, where she used the alias Chloe. On the night she disappeared, she was known to have met with a client, deposited $900 into her bank account, and attempted to call her boyfriend, although she didn't reach him. She was reported missing 6 days later by her mother, who grew concerned when she didn't hear from her. Just 1 week after Melissa was reported missing, her 15-year-old sister, Amanda, began receiving calls from her mobile phone. The creepy calls were always taunts from an unknown man. For 5 weeks, Melissa's family was harassed this way, with the man referring to the 24-year-old as a whore. On August the 26th, he asked Amanda, "Do you think you'll ever see her again?" He then added, "You won't. I killed her." He then hung up. He often explicitly described the sexual contact he'd had with the young woman, and at one point stated, "I'm watching your sister rot." Melissa's mother, Lynn, later described the caller as follows. He was softly spoken and had a very controlled and comfortable manner of speech, which made his horrific messages all the more devastating. He began to toy with her, and for the first time, she heard the voice of the killer. The police were able to trace some of these calls, which placed Melissa's mobile phone in Madison Square Garden, Midtown Manhattan, and Massapequa in Nassau County, Long Island, but they were never able to pin down who the caller was. Lynn would later tell the media that around the time that Melissa went missing, her phone records showed a lot of calls to Manorville, notably an area where several other victims were discovered. The following year, on June 6, 2010, 22-year-old Megan Waterman would vanish from New York. She was staying at a motel in Hauppauge, about 15 miles northeast of Gilgo Beach at the time. Megan was another sex worker who utilized Craigslist to advertise and arrange appointments with clients, but she did not work for herself. Authorities noted that her boyfriend was arrested on sex trafficking charges in 2012, although they added that he was not a suspect in her disappearance. On June 5th, Megan told her boyfriend that she was going out and would call him later. As with many of the other victims, she was never heard from again. She was reported missing by her family on June 8th, just 2 days later, after she failed to check in with her 3-year-old daughter, whom she had left in their care. A few months later, on September 2nd, 2010, 27-year-old Amber Lynn Costello disappeared. She was living in West Babylon, New York at the time, and had left her home to meet with a stranger who'd called her several times, offering to pay $2,500 for her services. For some time, Amber had been struggling with heroin addiction, and she participated in sex work in order to pay for her habit. According to some who knew her, the man she was meeting that day had visited her home previously. They described him as a large white male, approximately 6'4" to 6'6" in height, with big oval-style glasses. Another witness said he resembled an ogre. He was also reportedly driving a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche at the time. Amber's family, meanwhile, stated that they believed the 27-year-old was in a rehab center at the time of her disappearance and did not immediately report her missing when she fell out of contact, as they assumed it was due to her drug habit. In between the disappearance of Melissa Barthelemy and Megan Waterman, though, there was another victim, whose case prompted the opening of a wider investigation into the deaths and disappearances of vulnerable young women from New York. On May 1st, 2010, Shannon Gilbert, a sex worker from Jersey City, went to visit a client named Joseph Brewer at his home in Oak Beach, Long Island, roughly 7 miles from Gilgo Beach. Shannon was accompanied on this trip by Michael Pack, who'd driven her there, and in the early hours of the morning, Pack was approached by Brewer, who claimed that the young woman was acting irrational and wouldn't leave the house. Just moments later, Shannon herself then fled the house, reportedly in a panicked state, before she tried to get help from the nearby neighbours. At 4:51 a.m, she called the local police, claiming that someone was after her and that an unknown entity she referred to as they was trying to kill her. Pack subsequently followed Shannon and attempted to get her back in the car, but she was still so alarmed and afraid that she fled his grasp and disappeared into the night. Pack eventually drove home without her. A short time later, after the disturbance had been reported by neighbours, the police arrived at Brewer's property. By this time, however, both Shannon and Pack were gone, and police failed to search for Shannon, assuming that she'd gone home with Pack. It wasn't until Shannon's boyfriend alerted her family that she hadn't returned that she was reported missing. The family subsequently drove to Oak Beach, 140 miles from where they lived, to try and search for her themselves. Additionally, they pressured the local law enforcement agencies to investigate her disappearance. While police did launch a search, it yielded no results. It wasn't until a second search was conducted on December the 11th, 2010, that the Suffolk County Police Department stumbled across the body of Melissa Barthelemy. Scouring the area further, they soon uncovered the bodies of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. The Gilgo Beach Four, as they were later dubbed, were found around 150 meters from one another. Over the next year, investigators carried out further examinations of the area. This led them to recover more remains of Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack. They also found the body of another potential victim, whom they dubbed Asian Doe. Asian Doe remains unidentified to this day. The victim is described as being a biological male of Asian descent, but was dressed in a woman's clothing, suggesting that they may have been a trans woman. They died from blunt force trauma, and it is believed that their time of death was sometime between 2001 and 2006. Authorities have theorized that Asian Doe was a sex worker who was killed when it was discovered that they were not a cisgender woman, but there have been few leads in this case since. 100 meters away from the body of Valerie Mack, investigators recovered that of Tatiana Marie Dykes, and during this search, they also found the head of Karen Vegata. Shannon Gilbert, meanwhile, remains missing for 19 months. She was finally found on December the 13th, 2011. Authorities initially came across a pair of jeans and shoes, then a pocketbook which contained Shannon's ID. These items were pulled from a marshy area near Oak Beach. Her body was found a week later, approximately 1/4 of a mile away. Her body was lying face up. There is much debate over Shannon's cause of death. Suffolk County medical examiners ruled that her case was death by misadventure, with police stating that she accidentally drowned in the marsh after becoming lost during a drug-induced panic. But Shannon's family believed she was murdered, pointing out that her clothes were found far away from her body. A forensic pathologist later chimed in after examining her remains and observed that she had suffered damage to her hyoid bone, indicating the possibility that she had been strangled to death. He added that it was odd that she had been found face up, as this was uncommon in drowning victims. Her official autopsy report states that her cause of death is undetermined. For years, there was little movement in the case of the Gilgo Beach serial killings and his victims, but in 2020, there were a few minor developments. The first of which was that on January the 16th, Suffolk County Police released photographs of a belt found near Ocean Parkway in Gilgo Beach. It had the letters HM or WH, depending on the belt's orientation, embossed into the black leather. Investigators believed that the belt was handled by the culprit and did not belong to any of the victims. Though the images were released, little information about the belt itself was made known, as authorities wanted to keep information about its relevance to the case close to their chest. Around this time, they also launched a website which would allow them to share information with the public and allow the public to submit useful tips. The website is no longer available. This same year, Jane Doe No. 6 was positively ID'd as Valerie Mack, and the New York State Supreme Court ordered that the police release Shannon Gilbert's 911 call recording, even though investigators had asked that it be kept private for another 10 years. It was released in 2022. In 2023, Jane Doe No. 7 was identified as Karen Vergata. Before the identification of Rex Heuermann, there was only one publicly identified person of interest, a killer named John Bitrolf. The Suffolk County prosecutor at the time claimed in September of 2017 that Bitrolf, who'd been convicted of the murders of 2 sex workers, was a suspect in the demise of Sandra Costilla, the first victim of the Gilgo Beach killer, who'd been murdered in 1993. Little is documented online about Bitrolf. He was convicted in 2017 of the murders of 2 sex workers, which took place in 1993 and 1994. Rita Tangredi was discovered dead in Suffolk County, New York on November 2, 1993, while Colleen McNamie's remains were found in Suffolk County on January 30, 1994. Colleen had been beaten, strangled to death, and left naked in the woods near the William Floyd Parkway. Bitrolf was arrested in 2014 after his DNA was found on both bodies, and he was given 50 years in prison for his crimes. He is currently imprisoned at the Clinton Correctional Facility in New York. Since his conviction, some members of law enforcement and related agencies have suspected that Bitrolf was the Gilgo Beach killer. He lived in Manorville around the time of several of the murders, and his home was only 3 miles from where the bodies of Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack were recovered. Interestingly, the daughter of Rita Tangredi was Melissa Barthelemy's best friend, which was another potential connection. However, as of 2024, Bitrolf has been ruled out of the Gilgo Beach killer case. For 30 years, the identity of the Gilgo Beach killer remained a mystery. In the 2020s, it seemed that there was very little happening in the case. But behind the scenes, investigators were working hard to tip up loose ends before finally making the announcement that so many had been waiting for. There was a suspect in custody, and he had been charged with the murders of 3 of the Gilgo Beach victims: Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. It was also noted that he was the prime suspect in the slaying of Maureen Brainard Barnes. The suspect was 59-year-old Rex Heuermann, who was arrested outside of his Manhattan office on July 13, 2023. Heuermann was a married father of 2 who had been born and raised on Long Island and had been working in Manhattan since 1987. At the time of his arrest, he was the president of an architecture firm named RH Consultants and Associates. His adult daughter was also working at the company. It had taken some time for Heuermann to come to the attention of the police, as he was only identified as a suspect in 2022 After investigators compiled a list of people who owned a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche in 2010, when Amber Costello went missing. They noted that as well as owning that vehicle, Heuermann matched the description of the very large and tall ogre-like man who was described by Amber's housemates. Furthermore, authorities were able to connect numerous burner phones to him and the locations where several of the victims had gone missing, and it was uncovered that his internet searches had regularly been for sadistic materials, child pornography, images of victims and their relatives. Heuermann had several online accounts under fake names which he used for illegal activities, including contacting sex workers, and searched other phrases such as "Why could law enforcement not trace the calls made by the Long Island serial killer? Why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught?" and "New phone technology may be key to break-in case." Authorities also observed that Heuermann's offices were in Manhattan, which was where several of the taunting phone calls to those who knew the victims had been made. Additionally, hundreds of electronics and around 300 guns were seized from the Heuermann home following the execution of a search warrant, and a detailed blueprint of the crimes was found on his PC. Another document, which included detailed categories such as problems, supplies, pre-prep, prep, and post-event, was also recovered. The document made references to DNA, tire marks, and bloodstains, and highlighted lessons from past murders and killing methods that he had researched. The most damning evidence of them all, though, was of course the DNA that was recovered from several victims. For example, on one of the belts used to restrain Maureen Brainard Barnes, there was DNA which was found to be a match to Heuermann's wife. He was charged with Maureen's murder in January of 2024. Later that year, in December, he was also charged with the 1993 slaying of Sandra Costea, after DNA from hairs found on her body was found to be a match to Heuermann. Additionally, his hair was found on the burlap sack used to cover Megan Waterman's corpse. His wife's hair was found on another two victims, but she was known to have been out of state at the time of the murders. At the time of Melissa Barthelomy's murder, she was in Iceland, while at the time of Megan Waterman's disappearance, she was in Maryland. She was in New Jersey when Amber Costello vanished. Prosecutors believe that the hairs from his wife transferred to Heuermann simply because of their shared living space. Heuermann was living in Massapequa Park, just 20 minutes from Gilgo Beach at the time of his arrest. His neighbours reported that he was a reserved man and that his family made no imprint at all on the neighbourhood. One stated, "Basically, we never had any contact with him, living here 22 years and never said two words to him." Another neighbour, Barry Oslander, told The Independent, "Most people don't knock on his door. During Halloween, the kids are told to stay away. He's not a very nice person." He added that the Heuermann family home was dilapidated and always in darkness. It is the same property that he grew up in, meaning he's lived in the same area his entire life. 59-year-old Maureen Holpit, who attended Byrne High School with Heuermann, recalled that he was a shy teenager who left love notes in her locker. She recalled that their few exchanges were pleasant and polite, stating, "I was always nice and friendly to him, you know. Seemed like he kinda got picked on and people would maybe portray him as a little nerdy. He was very quiet, mild-mannered, so I was nice and would say, 'Hey Rex, how are you?' She added that the love notes she received were not signed, but she once saw him slipping one into her locker. The pair were never an item. However, she had made it clear that she was not interested." As for Heuermann's family, news of his arrest came as a shock. Asa Ellerup met Heuermann when she was 18 years old. She recalled that she immediately fell madly in love with the man. The pair remained in touch as Asa married someone else and gave birth to a son. Heuermann would later help her pay for her divorce lawyer when the marriage failed. She went on to marry him in April of 1996. They had a daughter, Victoria, and lived as a family of 4 in Massapequa Park. Victoria recalled that her father was an open book. She stated that sometimes he got mad or frustrated and he once threw a plate in the sink. but she could not imagine him keeping such a huge and dark secret for so long. Adding, "A lot of people knew my dad, like long-term clients and people he worked with for years. It was no secret he hunted. It was no secret he had guns." She did note, however, that she didn't always know where her father was. He missed at least 2 family holidays, one in 2007 and another in 2009, which took place around the time of 2 of the Gilgo Beach murders. For the last few years, Victoria has been unsure of what to think of the murder charges. Naturally, she wants to believe that the man who raised her is innocent, given the terrifyingly violent nature of the crimes. But she told the producers of the documentary The Gilgo Beach Killer, House of Secrets, that she now believes her father is most likely the Gilgo Beach Killer, after she was given the facts of the case. Asa Ellerup, meanwhile, continues to struggle with the notion that Heuermann may be guilty. She has called him my hero, noting that they met after she was sexually assaulted by a classmate and tried to take her own life. She stated that he was there for her during all of it and that he stuck by her during various illnesses and when she had to undergo a double mastectomy in recent years. Though she divorced him and the settlement was finalized in 2025, Ellerup stated that she only did so for financial reasons and to protect the family's assets, and she has continued to refer to Heuermann as her husband. She recently began the process of moving to South Carolina and has plans to attend the trial in New York. She told the media that she will wait to see all of the evidence before drawing any conclusions, stating, "You want to know how I feel? They are picking, making assumptions for their narrative. I've known Rex since I was 18 years old. I know what this room, where prosecutors say Heuermann killed some of his victims, was originally used for, and they're just allegations." Heuermann has since been charged with the murders of Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor, on top of the existing charges for the murders of Sandra Costilla, Maureen Brainard Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. He has pleaded not guilty to all charges and continues to maintain his innocence. As of April 2025, Heuermann's case is still in the pre-trial stage, and his lawyers have been attempting to have key DNA evidence thrown out. This DNA evidence, mostly the hairs found on various victims, was linked to the father of 2 using nuclear DNA testing, which has never been used before in a New York court of law. CBS News reported that this method means that even an old, low-quality rootless hair strand can now be matched to a suspect if thousands of small locations on the DNA match. Such testing is often used to identify remains and to prevent disease, but despite this, Heuermann's lawyers have argued that it's extremely faulty and defective. They also called for the case to be split into multiple trials. While the judge agreed to have hearings to consider both possibilities, the outcome of these hearings is unknown at the time of writing this script. Meanwhile, authorities are continuing to investigate Heuermann to see if there are any other victims that can be linked to him. While he awaits trial, Heuermann is serving time at the Riverhead Correctional Facility in Suffolk County, New York. He spends most of his time isolated from the general population due to the nature of his alleged crimes. His trial date has not yet been set.